Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Redpill, joined by my co-host, as always, Dr. Benway. And Dr. Benway and I have been talking about our hobbies and pastimes, and the good doctor has a story to tell us. Doctor, what is the story you're going to tell us?
Well, you already know it. It's funny. We were talking the other day, and it was saying how, I think as a result of the podcast, I had purchased the Gore Vidal's 7-novel series on America and Imperial, or just the history of America, broadly speaking, right? And it's as per usual with these things, they're published by the same publisher in most cases, so they have the same kind of design, same kind of cover design, layout, whatnot. The colors of the titles are slightly different. That's just so you can identify it easier on the shelf. So you have a nice little series here. And I open up the box when it comes in. They're all nice and in order, except one, the very first volume chronologically in the series, Aaron Burr. And what they managed to do was send me the UK edition of the book, which does not have the same color schemes, same layout, same size even. It's a little bit smaller. And it just frustrated me to no end because it just, you have like a nice little thing going here. You have a nice series. It's a nice item on the shelf. Up one item off, and my mental, processing ability said, "You fucked me, Amazon. How dare you do that?" But that's the bit that got me thinking. It's like, well, collecting and hobbies have a tendency to do this. It's not as if the book's text is different.
Yeah.
You could still read it. You'll still get the whole thing. But part of the reason I get it as a physical book as opposed to something on a Kindle is because it will have a place on a shelf and it will be looked at as an object on a shelf. And so when it does not fit its as advertised on shelfness, there's a disappointment factor, to put it mildly, and an annoyance factor, to put it accurately. So that's the kind of cause of the discussion.
Yeah, I when you told me that story, I could completely understand because, you have 6 books that are of the same edition. They're each, different, slightly different colors, so like probably graduated in color, as it goes chronologically, right? And then there's the one book that sticks out, and it's like, no, even though it's the right book, the text is the same, okay, because it's the same author, the same everything, but no, it fucks up your scheme. It fucks up your little thing. And I understand that completely. Look, I think that it basically goes down to a sort of like neuroticism, compulsivity that we have. And probably us high-functioning autists, have this issue. But I understand it. I find it really just unnerving. And what's interesting, though, is that, see, the issue of collecting, of collecting editions, of having everything like all nice and neat and one after the other, right? This has been my experience. I used to do that. I used to collect. Things. First, for a while, I was collecting first editions of contemporary modern American literature. And I would, hunt for the first edition and the right one, and that it's in the right shape, okay? Now, for those of you who don't know, in book collecting, there's a whole range of categories as to the condition of the book. There's mint, there's very fine, and so on down the ladder. And so I'd be looking for mint or very fine for the one kind, like, for instance, I remember like having like a whole thing about finding Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow with an unsunned spine because it had this orange dust jacket. And because it was orange tends to fade very easily if it's sunned, even a little bit. And so, I was hunting for a first edition with the dust jacket that was not sunned, right? And it was the premium between the one that was, mint with a sunned spine and the one that was mint and the spine was pristine was like $200-300. I mean, it was a bump up in the price of the book of this first edition. And I remember like the satisfaction that like, that feeling when I finally got it. And,
the hunt. Yeah, you had the hunt.
Yeah, exactly. It was like that feeling of just supreme satisfaction. And I think that all hobbies do that there's some moment when you're like, it's as I imagined, as I pictured it. It's doing what I set my mind to a particular task and I achieved it. But once I had the object, I didn't care about it. Does that happen to you insofar as your collecting is concerned?
Sometimes, and it happens more so in the current setting as opposed to when you had to like go to the stores to find it. This is something I've heard quite often, more so with your generation than mine, but I've felt it a little bit too, which is think about back in the day when you had to find LPs.
Yeah.
For example, like you had to go to a specific store. Certain stores had a certain vibe where they would hold certain things. Others would be like, you can never find anything you like. You know, you had to call people to order it. You had to send your smoke signals up. The act of the hunt was a material thing, and when you got it, you know, it was this object and everything. When you can basically find something online with zero effort, you just say click that and bring it in.
Yeah.
The attachment to said object can easily go down to like nil very quickly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. If it's just you're going to get the thing just by a very pedestrian means, and there's nothing to it. Yeah. I remember like the some of the books that I was looking for. I remember hunting through the shelves of the Strand in New York, looking for the books that I was interested in, and other used bookstores. But yeah, the advent of online shopping just sort of like ruins that. You can get the aesthetic satisfaction of having like a whole set of something, of whatever. There are guys who collect baseballs. There are guys who collect, baseball bats and other memorabilia of baseball or football or whatever. Jerseys, signed jerseys of different players.
Right.
But if you're just going and shopping and buying it, there's nothing to it. There's something to be said about going through like a yard sale or whatever, and flipping through the LPs and finding, like the Starfleet EP, that there are maybe 500, 600 copies in the world, right? And I had one, and I was dumb enough to sell it, and I'm like, what was I thinking? Because there really were, I mean, for those of you who don't collect records, the Starfleet EP was Brian May and Eddie Van Halen and a couple of other musicians. They jammed together for fun. And they recorded a Japanese anime theme song called Starfleet, and it was like a hard rock, almost heavy metal version of it. It was really funny, and they released an EP just for kicks, because these are very successful musicians. They're not going to earn any money off of it, and they only printed like a couple of thousand EPs, and most of them were stamped with the label. With that thing saying that it came straight from the label to be played by DJs, right? There were only like 500 copies that were pristine. And I had one, okay? And, well, now that thing is worth a fortune. But anyway,
No, because you bring up something, because like when you have like a collecting hobby, it's not just the possession of the item in and of itself, although that does have value.
Yeah.
You're buying the whole experience around it. It's funny you mentioned the Strand bookstore. I've never had a chance to be there, but I'm very intimately familiar with the whole experience of the Strand.
Yeah.
Not just from knowing people who've been there, but like seeing even like little advertisements and documentaries about the Strand and like everybody's experience. Because there are bookstores in Chicago not unlike it, not on the same scale, but certainly has that same vibe where, the rows of like maze-like books everywhere. The certain smell of the bookstore, that certain attitude of the people who work there were just pissed off that you were even there bothering to ask them questions.
Yeah.
That's the whole, thing. It's like, because you pick up the, be it a book, an LP, what have you, you carry with it not just the content of it, you carry with it the story. I'm looking right now at my desk. I have the 4 volumes. I think this was an edition from the 60s or maybe even the 50s of the Journals of Andre Gide. Andre Gide, for those unfamiliar, if Proust, having published The Remembrance of Things Past in the 20s, more or less, of France, Gide is the half generation preceding him. He's the big influence on like Jean Genet, Celine, whatnot. Very, well-known French author, a little bit unremembered now, but his journals are considered, that's the pinnacle of French writing for a lot of folks. So I remember exactly where I got them. It was at Powell's bookstore in Hyde Park, Chicago, which is the sister store-ish of Powell's in in Portland. I think it's the same family. They just separated out. And I, remember I was with my best friend. It was late at night on like a Thursday or a Friday. You know, it was like, fuck work. I don't, you know, I'm just leaving early. I'm going to go to the bookstore, talking this, that, and the other. I remember all of those details, and I know those details whenever I look at the book.
Yeah.
And that's part of the joy of remembering that.
Well, it's what you're talking about is the inefficiencies of the market. Because if you think about it, like for instance, book selling, right? You have like bookshops, and that, you know, each individual bookshop, and that's one way to sell a book, right? But then a more efficient way than that is to have like Barnes and Noble, and all the stores are basically the same. They're big, you know, superstores of books. And then, you know, more efficient than that even is Amazon, where you get a box to your doorstep. You don't have to go anywhere. And the improved market efficiencies strip away from the experience. And yeah, it's all very convenient and fine. And yeah, I like Amazon, the convenience of like, ooh, I see something, I click it, and it's going to be at my doorstep, you know, in a day or less sometimes. I mean, now they're experimenting with same-day delivery, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Crazy in the sense of like incredible efficiencies, a remarkable achievement on a logistical level. Well, Americans have always been geniuses insofar as logistics. That's the secret genius of America, logistics. But anyway, it strips away from the experience because it's those inefficiencies that make it memorable. I remember when I got Humboldt's Gift, for example, the Saul Bellow novel, and I have a first edition of it. And I had to go to, well, it's not a big deal because at that time Saul Bellow was a big deal. And so first edition was a very large print. And so it's not particularly valuable. But I remember it was one of the first books that I self-consciously got as a first edition. I remember I got it when I was like 19, 20 maybe, 19, something like that. And I went down to this English bookstore in Santiago to get it. And I called before and they had it. And it was, you know, it was a very fine copy. It just looked lovely, and it had that, you know, lovely smell of old books. You know, I bought
Old
it.
paper, yeah.
Yeah. At that time, when I bought it, it must have been, I don't know, it must have been like 12 years old. The book must have been 12, 15 years old, something like that, not more than that. And it already had that feel to it, that vibe, and it's very satisfying. But here's the thing. I got to a point where I got sick of it. I got sick of collecting, you know, first editions, and I took all the first editions that were valuable, that were like more than $100 each, and I just sold them all. I just sold it all in bulk and just got done with it. And the same with my CD collections. I wound up having a collection of about 1,100 CDs. Nothing remarkable. Okay, and I sold them all, and I don't really regret it. I held on to a couple of CDs that were like for sentimental value. But even those, I don't really care for because, you know, I put them in a box and I forgot about it, you know, and I never opened that box because I think what happens is that I think collecting is like of a certain age. And then after that age, you don't really care. In my own case, I'm 50 and I don't have anything that on a material level that I'm particularly invested in. You know, I mean, like, for instance, my computer, I think, is the most valuable thing to me, or my computers, because I have several, because each of them does different functionalities. But the thing is, it's more like, it's not that I care about the specific object of the computer. I care about all the information that's stored within the computers, you know, and I'd be devastated if I lost it because I'd have to, you know, rebuild it, even though I have backups and what have you. Actually, devastated is too strong a word. It would be annoyed because since I do have backups, I'm not going to lose anything permanently. It's just going to be, you know, oh shit, I lost it. Now, what do I do now? You know, I gotta rebuild the computer from the backups, and oh, that's annoying. I wouldn't even think about the cost of the computers, and zero sentimental value. Although my computers do have stickers on them from different places I've been to, and I'd be, you know, annoyed to have lost those stickers, but I think that the stickers actually point to what I find valuable now, which is the experience. I don't care about the objects anymore. It's the experience.
What about your gear? I know you're very fond of your gear.
No. I look at my gear as utilitarian, you know. I have... go ahead.
I don't believe you.
No, really. No, I don't fetishize it. I don't... I treat my gear kind of crappily, to tell you the truth. I don't take care of it in any kind of like maniacal way. I used to, okay? I used to be very uptight about my gear. I didn't like when people touched it. Um, like for instance, I used to have like a very expensive turntable and that whole thing, and I had literal fits if anybody tried to touch it, which now I have to admit I'm embarrassed about. I mean, this was shit that happened when I was like, I don't know, 22, 23. Uh, and I'm frankly I'm embarrassed by it because I think I just went overboard because it's just a fucking turntable, big deal, you know. But you know that kind of thing happens, you know. And I think that to tell you the truth, I think that a lot of times collecting objects um, can easily be a way to um, supplant human connection. You know, I'm of two minds about collecting stuff because I understand the satisfaction, that compulsivity, that obsessiveness that is uh, satiated when you finish when you complete the set. You know, when you have like the perfect collection and it's all alphabetized and by year of artist, by year of release rather, and you know I understand that perfectly. But I suspect that it's really a way to supplant human connection because it's easier to have a relationship with an object than with a person.
Maybe in instances it does. I know it doesn't seem that way to me, in part because I know I use the objects as a mechanism for having, that, shareable moment or the connecting moment, be it with a girlfriend or close friends. It says like, hey, this finally came in. Let's go. Well, let's watch it together. Let's have dinner over it. All those kinds of things. And, those acts or, the collected items help facilitate those acts in a way because a lot of the discussion and the connection that comes out of it is the catalytically a response to that object. And also relatedly, the act of you know getting something for someone,
Hmm.
to help kind of complete the collection, also help is a nice like entry or facilitation factor in those things. I remember like the gifts my friends gave me. I know, I got, my friend so and so gave me this first Norman Mailer book, said you'll like it, because, and he points out these 3 or 4 passages, and from there I go on to the rest of the books, and I know exactly the history behind it. It's still, to your point, what's the big thing? It's the peripheral stuff around it, right? The objects
Yeah,
have their place,
yeah.
but they're not the full story. And I certainly think, though, there are probably some people who will, have the relationship with their the various objects. No doubt.
Yeah.
The objects don't respond. They do what you tell them to do for the most part. Um, Easy to manage. They don't talk back. All that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and you can sort of like bestow affection on the object in a way that
Hmm.
is more safe, if you will, than on a person. Because, like you said, the object won't talk back, won't argue with you. It's like a dog. Although I prefer a dog to an object at this point, and a person to a dog at this point. It's how could I put this? I think it's a natural evolution in maturity that when you're younger, you pay more attention to objects. Now, for instance, um, like on my backpack and my computers, I have stickers of the places I've been to. I have several backpacks, and usually what I do is that I sort of like have one backpack and or knapsack or book bag or whatever you want to call it, and I take it with me to different places. And at those places, I'll go out of my way to find those cheesy, touristy patches, that they sell at the tourist shop, at the souvenir shop. And I'll get those stupid patches and I'll glue it on to my backpack until it's full, right? And it gives me like enormous satisfaction. And it's really stupid, but it does. It just gives me it gives me
You
satisfaction.
should have pulled a Saving Private Ryan. Just get tins of dirt from all
Well,
the little places
I
you've been.
always thought that was so absurd. By the way, I mean those tins must have weighed a ton. That just didn't seem logical to me. If it had been like a little thing, sure, but like a whole tin, I mean that must have been
Yeah,
like.
well, yeah, it looked like a tin of fish. In fact, that probably what the tin originally contained,
Yeah,
right? I mean, so
yeah, it must have been yeah, it was a ration tin, right? And each of those with all that dirt must have weighed, each of them must have weighed, I don't know, a pound and a half maybe. And he had like
that's
four
a
of them.
lot.
That's a lot.
Eh, I mean, Maybe. I mean, it's not like I go about my day saying like, okay, let's fill up some earth in tins and
Hmm.
see what the weight distribution is. I mean, a pound seems probably a little too heavy for what it was, but I mean,
Yeah.
I get your point.
Yeah, but anyway,
Um,
but I understand the impulse though. I completely understand the impulse of collecting bits of dirt from the places you've been to. Yeah, it makes complete sense to me. Um, yeah,
but
yeah.
certainly, the collecting is certainly a piece of a hobby, certainly. But I think a lot of what we would call hobbies, right, or things, time wasters, or things to invoke your attention, right. It's not all just collecting this stuff versus that stuff. Oftentimes it's, as we said before, in the collecting of objects, it's the action, right. So certainly what we're doing seems to me to be a perfect case study of a hobby, right.
Hmm.
Are you, even though it's not tangible, wouldn't you say you're in some sense collecting, the output of your
Oh,
of
absolutely.
your of
No,
your of your work hours and
absolutely.
everything? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have like all my videos very carefully duplicated, even though they're on the channel. On the channel itself, I have all of my content duplicated, and I'm very careful with it. I mean, not to lose it, because and I have written down specific instructions of what to look for and where they are, and the whole thing, in case something were to happen to me. Because yeah, the videos that I'm making are for a reason, as I've said before, and kind of boringly. But at the same time, it is a hobby. Okay, the hobby of making these videos. It's just a lot of fun. It's very satisfying. It's very satisfying to have a video done and uploading it. Like as we're recording this, this would have been the previous week. But the previous week, I was supposed to put up a video, and there was a technical problem with my editing software, and it basically crashed, and I blew a lot of work, and it was like too late, and so I had to start all over, and so like screw it. I had to move around I had moved around the podcast, and so anyway, but that's not important. The important part is it 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 made me very unhappy to not be able to post on the time and date that I had usually posted, because I like it. It just makes me feel very happy to be making my schedule, noon Eastern. It just, it's like collecting your books. It's like having all the editions of it. I
Yeah,
have.
I think
Go
my
ahead.
take on a lot of this, I don't think it's exclusively the case, but I think a lot of it is because people say, "Oh, why are you're building these models, or you're collecting these things?" I think at the end of the day, it's an act in which, whether accurately or not, you perceive yourself as in largely control or defining of the success, right?
Yeah.
To your point, you have your deadlines. You're like, I'm very adamant about making those deadlines because you imposed them. Nobody else imposed them.
Yeah.
It was you.
There's no boss.
The content, exactly. There's no boss. The length of your content is largely determined by you. The content of these podcasts are determined by us, right? What goes in, what goes out by us. It's an act in which you could say, by and large, it didn't really depend on anyone else, right? I mean, well, us talking is a different case, but by and large, it's like I got to do every little bit under my control, right? And there's a satisfaction with that. There's not this extra cooks in the kitchen. It's not you're doing this on behalf of someone else, or you're not doing it for the goal of achieving this return or that return. It's just this was the exercise of my complete and controlled desire.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's something else about hobbies. Let me separate. Let me make a split between collecting and other forms of hobbies that are more like activities. Because like collecting, you buy the thing and you have it, and that's it. You don't have to do anything about it. But there are certain hobbies, such as, for instance, model making. I used to be into model making in a big way when I was a boy, when I was like 11, between the ages of about 10 and 13, pretty much when I discovered girls. And I was huge into it. I built all kinds of models. I started off with the monogram and Revell models, and kind of like the cheapy paints, and eventually graduated to Tamiya. I don't know how it is now, but back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, Tamiya was like the gold standard of model making. It was this Japanese manufacturer, and everything about their products was just pristine and perfect. Okay, I mean, even the boxes that the model came in were just, just made with such care, very Japanese, right? And and what happened was that I remember the first one I bought was an M48 patent tank with a nightlight, which is the kind of tank that was used in the Vietnam War, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the early part, okay. And I remember buying that, and for me, it cost a lot of money. It cost I think it was like $23 for a kid in 1980. That was a huge amount of money. You got to remember that a record was $7. So I was basically buying 3 records. My salary, my wages. I delivered papers once a week, a local rag, which is really just advertising. And I delivered this rag to my neighborhood, and I got paid $7.41. And so blowing $23 on one model, that was basically almost a month's worth of work, right? And it was like a big deal. And I remember buying it, and I almost reverently opened it. And I remember I cleared off my desk, and I opened the box really carefully, and I took each piece and I laid it down one next to the other. I mean, it was almost like a religious experience, right? And I started doing the model, and I remember thinking, sort of like meditating over the how models, they come in like a little frame, a plastic frame.
Yeah,
right?
the spiky bits. Yeah. In fact, I was going to ask you what sounds silly, but were they plastic or were they resin? What were your?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell you. I mean, I wouldn't know the difference. I assume plastic, but I mean, I honestly didn't know. I mean, I wasn't that into it. I mean, I wasn't into that level of detail, but I knew, I was told by the people who knew there was this place called Orange Blossom Hobbies. That was the primo place for hobbyists, right? And they told me that, the Tamiya, they injected, the mold was injected or something like that. And so it was it was high end. I mean, that's why it was so expensive, right? And it wasn't that the shop was gouging me, okay? Because I'd seen elsewhere that Tamiyas were always expensive all over the place. Remember, this was way before internet, so you had to go to the shop, right? And so I remember getting it and making it. And it was the first model that I was actually skilled enough to do something with it. And rather than do a diorama, though, I was too scared because I figured I'd screw it up. So I just painted it as it were. And I remember retrospectively, the thing that I liked the most was that the nightlight, right? I did several versions of it with different paints, and it always looked unreal. And so I decided that what I was going to actually do was create a fake canvas cover for it, okay? And what I used was Scotch tape, because Scotch tape, the kind of Scotch tape at that time, it had little tiny grains, right? Grooves in it, okay? It wasn't like the smooth Scotch tape. It was that dull kind of matte kind of Scotch tape. And so when you painted that, it looked as if it were fabric at that scale of I forget what scale it was, 128, 124, I suppose, I forget. And so I put Scotch tape over the light and then painted over it, and it looked like fabric. It looked, unbelievably cool, right? And I was so happy with that. I was just so happy of having had this problem and solved it so elegantly, It's just the trivial stuff like that. And
Well, yeah, I did this. I had similar things, actually. For a period of time, I was into the Warhammer series, Warhammer 40K, and that involved building, your little model pieces. I'm actually holding one right now. I have them on my shelf, the old bits. And the reason I have them is because part of the thing you had to kind of deal with is they were come disassembled. You had to assemble them, and then you had to paint them, because no one's gonna get really excited about an unpainted model on the board, and you're doing all the various complicated rules, what have you. So you actually had to go through the process of at least minimally learning how to paint these fuckers. And I still have the first few. The reason I still hold on to certain pieces over the others is these were the first few I started painting. And so I actually, even though it sounds ridiculous, first time I started using spray paint to get a base and a buffer and everything, and then the first layer of coating. And when I learned learning the details of hey, you use a smaller brush off to the side to get certain fine details. You use a bigger brush to get certain just broad stroke details. And then when you figured out, if you do a little wash, which is just basically diluted paint and water and you just roll it over things, you have awesome shadow effects and all of these other things. Or you put it on like sort of, this reddish color on flesh tones, you get the sense of like a living vibrancy. Even it's a fucking 2-inch, 3-inch model. The technique of learning how to do all of those things is I think the key part, right? That was, the sense of satisfaction. It's like, oh, you learned the practicality of actually having to do something, and you had the outcome of it. And the pieces I have actually aren't even the best painted pieces that I've done. I just have the original ones that I tried, and I just liked them.
I remember the best thing that I ever painted, the thing that is just like, it was head and shoulders, like beyond belief, was at one time I was into making Formula One racers, right? Tamiya ones, of course. By this time I was all Tamiya, I mean, if it's not Tamiya, it ain't right. You know what I mean? And so I got this pit crew, okay? With like, all the guys, it was like 5 guys and all their tools, right? And there was this one chest of screwdrivers, right? Now, this was a tiny model. Okay, this is 1/24th, okay? So I'm guessing, I don't have it. It's gone long ago, thrown away. And I wish I hadn't thrown away this particular piece. It was this little chest, right, of, the typical tool chest, right?
Right.
And it had like all the screwdrivers hanging there. And this whole thing must have been maybe 2-3 inches, not more than that. It could not have been more than 3 inches, probably closer to 2, thinking about it. And I took this brush and I painted each individual handle, but each individual screwdriver, right? I mean, like the whole thing, I painted it black. But then, with the screwdrivers, I painted the handle, part of it red, and the when it gets to the shaft of the screwdriver, I painted that part yellow, and then the shaft silver. But in the very tips of the thing, I flicked like a single brush stroke, or even less, of similarly diluted paint, black with a little bit of turpentine, because I used oil-based paints. Mm-hmm. And I got this perfect little thing, and I'm talking, it must have been like 50 little screwdrivers. These fuckers were tiny. I mean, my eyesight today would not be able to distinguish them, okay? I mean, it was that level of detail. It was so microscopic. I remember I had to like use a clamp to hold the piece and hold my right hand with my left hand to steady it. I mean, it was like, it was like the most delicate brain surgery imaginable, right? And it was just so satisfying when I finished this piece. It was like this perfect little thing, and it looked real, right? It was like, oh, that was just so satisfying. But the thing that I noticed with all these hobbies, these very time-consuming hobbies, is that it gives your mind such rest. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Oh, man.
Yes.
That was the thing that I liked so much.
Yeah, it was a rest. It was one of the things I've been saying a lot in this podcast is how I'm spending less time with external stimuli, right?
Yeah.
Not too much media, not too much news, try to limit Twitter where possible, what have you.
Yeah.
All of those, to a certain extent, are related, or they're proxies for that level of focus I'll get when like you said, when I'm doing either painting, if I'm editing some, either a video, or if I am editing, some written work, or if I am actually doing the writing. That's a level of focusing in where like I literally am not even thinking about anything else. The brain is, hyper focused, or it's, it's just, and ironically, when you're hyper focused, you're counterintuitively, because you don't feel it per se, but you are more relaxed.
Much more.
You're at the
much
very
more.
least, you're at least less. You're less stressed.
Yes.
The greater days of life. Now, you could wind up stressed at your hobby, right? If you didn't get the paint just right, or you did this, that, or the other, you could get pissed off. But by and large, I rarely would have that happen, right?
Well, there's also the obvious thing is that, see, if you fuck up your hobby, it does not matter. Who gives a shit? I mean, if I would have been painting that little tool chest and I'd fucked it up, it would have been like, damn, and that would have been that. I know for a fact, I can't recall them offhand, but I know for a fact that I must have screwed up a bunch of other pieces I only remember the successes, which is perfectly natural. It's human nature. But but the successes, even yeah, I would have been like, damn. But by the same token, your ability to yell at the thing that fucked up in your hobby is a great tension release, because often as not, you can't yell at the things going on in your actual life, because to yell at them would cause potentially irreparable harm. You see what I'm saying? So
yes, you can't yell at your boss, you know, you cocksucking motherfucker, keep the fucking glue together, you prick. You can say that to a model very easily.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah, exactly right.
Boss, not so much.
Yeah, exactly. The boss or the wife or the kids or whoever else stresses you out. Because even the people that you most love stress you out. Sometimes the people you most love stress you out the most, right? But I think that how could I put it? The it it's not only that the hobby gives you a release; it frees you of your mind. Um, Going back to what you said before of how when you're hyper focused, you find relief. Yeah, that's very true. Like I think that the best definition of meditation I ever heard was in that movie Layer Cake, where the guy's saying how he takes apart his gun, sometimes blindfolded, and the guy says, the whole point of meditation is to focus on some mundane task so that your mind can rest, so the rest of your mind can rest. That's absolutely true. And I think that that's what hobbies should be doing, properly speaking. They should be making you focus on something mundane and relatively mindless. Because, like, for instance, editing, editing either text or film or whatever, or something like that demands concentration. But when you're doing, like, painting the little model, right, it doesn't really require any kind of thought. Okay, it just requires sort of like empty concentration to make sure that your brush strokes are correct. Okay, and I think that that's even better. It's a hobby that's even more mindless, and the more mindless, but the more intensely focused you are, the better for the rest of your mind, so that your mind can find rest. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if it makes sense.
You know what's interesting? Well, it does. This is a phenomenon I had. I want to know if you had it, or if
Sure.
our audience has it. Or if I'm in the middle of some sort of meditative process, even if it's just listening to specific music and that kind of, I'm in the zone kind of
Yeah.
way, or doing modeling.
Yeah.
If someone by accident interrupts me or asks me a question or calls,
I'm pissed.
the biggest flip out I've ever had in my life is when I was interrupted during, thing. I'm like, what the fuck do you think you're trying to do? I have the door locked, get the fuck out of my face. Like, and I'm not really pissed at the person in the way that I sound. It's not like, it sounds like I want to kill them.
Yeah.
And I have that level of anger.
Did you did you actually say this, or did you want to say it?
Oh, I said it.
Oh, you said it. Okay. And I
said it.
I take it, was it was it somebody important in your life? Don't tell me specific.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was just family member. But yeah, they kept away from me for the rest of the day. And like I said, I've had the biggest, like, what the fuck are you doing? Moments, anger moments have usually been there.
Yeah.
And it's not, like I said, it's weird because they haven't done anything that's particularly irksome. They just disrupted, the concentration, either the concentration or the meditative state, and that is the reverie you're getting is so intense and important. Any disruption feels aggressive. You know what I mean? So you have an aggressive response. I don't know if you've ever had that, but I've been, like I said, the most pissed I've ever been is that when my interruption, that my meditation's broken.
I've been irritated, severely irritated. I can't recall offhand, but I'm sure. Okay. I mean, it doesn't sound surprising what you're talking about. Okay. So I cannot recall offhand specific examples of this, but I would not doubt it. It doesn't sound out of the realm of the, it sounds about right.
And I'm certainly not proud of it. I'm
certainly not. Yeah.
I'm embarrassed by it, but I know that it will happen. If like someone does it again when I'm, meditating or doing something and someone disrupts me, I'll get pissed. I know I will.
Yeah.
and there's nothing I can do to control it, which tells me that it must be that level of mental, I don't know if it's relaxation or even vulnerability, right? I mean, you are really letting down all sorts of barriers when you're in that state, to the point where like you almost feel, again, I'm going to use extreme language, but just to prove a point, it's almost like a violation, right? You know, you fucking disrupted a private, sanctuary moment. Who the fuck do you think you are, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
No, it's completely understandable. I think that, well, you got to be careful then. You got to be careful to really lock yourself off when you're doing your hobby, so that you don't have any kind of interruption like that can, like, push you overboard, because you certainly don't want that. You don't want to be pushed overboard and wind up saying things that you'll deeply regret. Perhaps to a
Well,
specific.
I always, if I'm in that state, oftentimes, especially now, there's usually no one else in the house that I'm doing it. But if I am in a zone where people are in there, I just have like a little, I actually have it at the ready by the side of my desk all the time. It's not really a Post-it note. It's something more substantial that says just busy, something to the effect of busy, do not disturb. And they know
Yeah.
exactly what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, because you just need that. I think that you need that rest time from your mind.
Right.
It's exhausting being in your own head all the time sometimes. At least to me.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes I just get tired of being in my own head, and I just want a break. I just want to go away from my own head. I don't want to be. Right now I'm in the middle of doing a series on precisely this issue. And yeah, there are times when I just want to be outside of my own skull, and I need it.
Mm-hmm.
I need a vacation from myself. Okay, and in science fiction there are lots of stories about people who disassociate themselves, like Total Recall, famously. You get to be somebody completely different. You get to be a spy or a James Bond character, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I personally need that. And I don't know of anybody who does not need that. Or let me phrase it. Of the people whom I've gotten to know well, most of the people I've gotten to know well are fairly bright people. And so all of them tend to have this. So I don't know if it's a function of being bright or if it's just a function of being alive, that you just, at some point, you just need a little release. Here's something interesting. They found out that elephants periodically they'll go to some like rock or whatever, and they'll bang their head against a rock, okay, until there's sort of like, basically they have a slight concussion, right? And basically, they were wondering for the longest time what the hell that was all about, and they figured out that it was because when they did that, they got the equivalent of getting drunk, okay, that they got that feeling of being drunk, of being disassociated from yourself. And that, I don't know if this is an apocryphal story or not, okay? If it's true, and I remember reading it somewhere, I forget where, but it would make complete sense that maybe just consciousness, at whatever level, because we can agree that elephants are conscious. They might not be at a level of consciousness as a human beings, but they are conscious. And they are self-aware. I mean, if they feel pain, they are self-aware by definition, right? One can say that maybe every conscious being needs a break from being themselves. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, obviously, I couldn't tell you one way or the other with animals, but it's almost a metaphysical limitation to be able to say that, or an epistemological one, if you will. But I think it's probably somewhat universal with humans.
Yeah.
And which is why I think it's fundamentally important that when someone has a hobby, if you're in a relationship, you have someone with a hobby, or even if they don't have a hobby, they have some sort of thing they're doing to completely just extract themselves, from themselves. I mean, in a non-harmful way. It's not like, Mary Sue's hobby is to get drunk and shit on the floor. No, that's a problem. But like, if someone has like, like my girlfriend paints, I, do my writing, and I do have my musical moments and whatnot. Usually those are very private moments for person. If you're in a relationship, I'd say it's healthy and important that you let them do that and don't interrupt them. You know what I mean? You have to allow them and enable them to your point, to escape their situation because they will just be healthier for it.
Yeah.
And so this constant notion like, oh, we have to share everything. I got to be there for you. You
No.
become very self-aware of yourself at that point, and you are negating the point. Like, do you ever feel? And it's almost like I think it manifests this way, but I don't think it's superficially what it is. You know, when you get the sense of feeling embarrassed if you have to explain your hobby to someone.
Yeah.
If you explain what you're doing, it's like, well, it's this, that, and the other. And they're like, oh, what's that? What's that? You become self-conscious of perhaps the absurdity of it. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you're building a model. How absurd. Or, oh, what are you writing a short story? You know, ooh, that sounds, you know, this, that,
Stupid.
or the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stupid. You then become very aware that, oh, it's still me doing my little thing. And it feels like a time waster. And you're like, you're just, you know, angry. But if you just let it be and, you know, say like, oh, so and you know, this is so and so's painting time. You know,
yeah.
Let it happen. It's just much healthier than that way. And I think after you had mentioned the thing about being disassociated, I always thought, what the hell was the embarrassment about? Because it's not like I should be embarrassed by it. And I think it's that. I think it's the imposition of the self-consciousness back on it.
Yeah.
When your whole point of it is to not be self-conscious.
Exactly right. I think you nailed it on the head. Yeah, because I've noticed that, especially with like not too bright girls. Okay, you know, because guys often is not they're attracted to pretty girls, but pretty girls are not necessarily too bright. And sometimes you're dating some pretty girl, and she asks you about some hobby, and she sort of like, you know, shits all over it, you know, because the smart girl would know enough not to ask about it or understand it implicitly, and the not too bright girl, yeah, and so you're doing something that is inherently silly. Like, for instance, model making. That is the dumbest fucking thing, right? But I'll tell you right now, if I had the opportunity to build some models, I'd do it. Sure, I'd pick up like a fistful of paints and you know, a couple of Tamiya models, and I'd make them. Sure, it would be fun. I don't do that now because I think that those pastimes are unproductive. Because like those models, right? They've been created to be assembled. The end product in and of itself is kind of trivial. It's the process. That's the whole point of it. But I've gotten to a point that there are other things that I prefer to do that fulfill the same function, but that produce something useful. For example, like I do like woodworking things. I can't say that I do them very well, but like I recently completed a little like a little mobile bookshelf / table. Okay, what it is that it's a little like a roughly square and about 2-3 feet tall bookshelf that has wheels on it, casters, and what it is it has bookshelves on all 4 sides. It's like a coffee table. That's also, I
saw it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, but what happens is that the table, rather than being just square, one part of it sort of like sticks out, okay? And what it is that it becomes a table, so I can use it like sitting on a chair or a sofa, and I can use that table to put stuff on it or write stuff or whatever. And the weight of the books in the table makes it so it doesn't tip over, right? And yeah, it cost me $40 to make. It took me, I couldn't have taken me more than 3-4 hours to build. I mean, realistically. Or perhaps maybe a bit more, because the surface of the table top, I made it out of slats of wood, and I had to glue them together and all that. But okay, it didn't take me that long to make, and it was very satisfying to do. And while I was doing it, it was just it was sort of like the same feeling of doing models. But the difference, of course, being is that I ended up with a practical a piece of furniture that actually has a utility to it. You know, it's perfect for my studio. So yeah, it was like great, and I'm really happy with it. And that gave me enormous satisfaction. So that kind of woodworking, that kind of activity today is what I prefer than something that will end up without any kind of use. Because the idea of spending that much time and winding up with essentially nothing is just not satisfying. Okay. Perhaps what happened was that when I was a child, I would build these models because I would end up with a toy, you know. Because do keep in mind that when I was building the stuff, it was between the ages of 9, 10, and 13, and I was still a boy, it appealed to my childish nature. And, I would actually I did hang my models of my airplanes up from my ceiling, as if they were like in aerial combat. I did do that. Okay. I was that kid. And I'm not ashamed of it at all. But the thing is, it's a childish thing. The utility of it was, at the end of it, I'd have this toy to play with. But now as a man, I don't want to have a toy to play with. I want to, if I were to build it to me a model now, I'd finish it, appreciate it, and then probably toss it into the garbage the very next day, because what good is it? What am I going to do with this stupid model? You see what I'm saying?
Well, it's interesting you'd mentioned that. I would say, yeah, recently my creative hobbies have shifted to the more practical as well. But it's I don't want to say fully practical, because I'll go into why in a second. For me, it's cooking now. And it's different. Above and beyond, because and it's above and beyond even the sheer utilitarianism of, I can spend very little time making an edible, pasta, right?
Right.
Doesn't take much effort to do that. Where I'm at now is it's the whole process of making it and knowing all of the little details that kind of will make a slightly better meal versus not. For example, I make my own pasta sauce from scratch now. Like, I get the various, either the fresh tomatoes or the a certain type of tomato that I know will have a flavor that'll work. Put all of the seasonings in it. It's the slow 1.5 to 2 hours to cook it down to what it needs to be.
Right.
Then we'll go out of my way to mix the meats in a certain kind of way to make the right consistency of meatball. It doesn't really, for most people, it doesn't make a difference one way or the other, but for me, I know the difference. Even the cookware I use, you can make pretty much anything you want in the shittiest of pans you want. You have a lot less control over it. And when I'm using slightly better equipment, I know the techniques I can use to make this a lot simpler, or do a lot more interesting details, because you have more control over it.
Yeah.
As it were.
I got into cooking too for a while, but my approach was different. It's not that I learned a lot of recipes. I would focus on one dish, one recipe, and do it over and over and over again until I got it perfect. And then I move on to the next dish. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for me, it's not even so much recipes, it's techniques. So, and because recipes are, the difference between a recipe and a technique is, a recipe is just the instruction of the ingredients, when and where.
Yeah. The
technique it's like how to do it. For example, knowing how to use a broiler and searing, be it a cheese or some sort of coating on a dish to have like a crisp crust to it. That's called something in French. It's called gratin, or and whatnot. So you can do many infinite things with gratin. Making a stew, or braising, if you will, which is essentially taking tough meat, having a flavorful liquid in like a low temperature setting for a long period of time, creates great flavors. That's another technique. You can do whatever you want in the fucking braiser or the stew, whatnot. It doesn't really matter. So it's learning all of those techniques, and it gives you a sense of, even if I don't have a recipe, I know why the food is doing what it's doing under what conditions, and I can adjust and make do with what I want. The other thing I love doing now, even though it's not like something I conscientiously try to do, but I know, like, if for example, they'll give me a recipe for, I don't know, like coq au vin, chicken and wine, and they may call for certain ingredients that I'm like, okay, I know I don't have that, but what's the equivalent that will give me the same thing? Oh, this, that, or the other. I do have that. I don't have that. I'll do this concoction. That, kind of flying by the seat of your pants is the exciting part.
Well, I think that you and I approach it differently then, because you would go into technique, whereas what I would do is, like, for instance, one of the dishes that I learned was a oven cooked fried chicken. Okay, and it sounds a little weird, but what it is basically this: you take chicken, usually breast, because it's easiest to work with, right? And you take a pan, and you put butter or lard or whatever frying you want to, or oil even. And what you do is that you dust the chicken in your batter or in just plain old flour, right? And then you pan fry it, but just so that the outside fries, okay?
It's a sear.
Yeah, it's basically searing, right? And then from there, you take it and you put it in the oven on a grill so that it doesn't stick to it, right?
Right.
And you cook it. You cook it slow cook, right? And what happens is that, see, because of the exterior coating, the chicken doesn't dry out. Okay, so you have like the best of both worlds in between, oven chicken and fried chicken. And it's different little techniques along the way. It wasn't like a specific technique. It was like several different things, and it seems fairly easy, and it is easy. But when you get good at it, that was the thing. Because what happened was that, for instance, a lot of times my the crust of it would not come out crispy, and it would just And when I finally got it perfect, okay, when it was just like, it was like on the outside, it was like crispy as like, just fresh bread, right? And on the inside, it was just like juicy and just really well cooked. I was like, I'm happy. And then I moved on to the next thing. It was like that. I got it perfect. Next, you see what I mean?
Right. Well, by the way, I think what you did, you still learned the techniques.
Yeah.
It's
But
funny that the thing you emphasized wasn't really the recipe. That was a technique.
Yeah.
The searing and locking in the juices. You could do that with almost any meat at the end of the day.
Exactly. You can.
Any recipe.
Yeah, you can.
Right.
And this is a way to make a very interesting kind of beef Wellington. It's not the Queen's beef Wellington, but it's a form of beef Wellington which you can, and it comes out really good because I tried it. And once you master this with chicken, because chicken is easier and cheaper, frankly,
yes.
you can do it with a really good cut of beef. I'm talking filet mignon, and it'll come out perfect. And well, I personally now prefer my meats very rare, but you can do everything with it, and it's just like a lot of fun. It's a great hobby, and.
Exactly, and it's funny, and I've noticed this as well. When I first started getting into cooking, I had this problem, which was I would spend all these hours getting it right, and it would come out right, and I would feed it. I usually feed it to my family, and my parents, typical Eastern Europeans, like I'd say, "How was it? Is it good?" And I'm expecting, "Oh, fantastic." They're like, it's okay, it's fine. And I'm like, "You motherfuckers, I'll never cook for you again." Kind of thing. And it's hard to overcome that because for most people it's like it's just practical. It's like, here comes the food. When you do get the and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but like even when I made like a little pasta salad dish,
right.
Not a typical pasta salad, but just a pasta salad dish for an office event, people really loved it. Like, and that was satisfying. People say like, I don't even like pasta salad, and I enjoyed what you did here because it wasn't like a saucy mayonnaise thing. It was a little lighter. I had a lot more vegetables than most people typically have. And people loved it, and it's like I remember to this day. I'm like, yep, that was a satisfactory thing. Done.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I enjoy doing, insofar as cooking is concerned, is inviting people over, and inviting a lot of people over. But here's the thing: having them participate in the cooking process. Okay.
Yes.
Because even if they're just standing around and drinking wine and shooting the breeze while I'm cooking, and I don't mind. It's just very, very satisfying to have people around while you're working on something, and also they appreciate it more because it's not just
a very strong bonding.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think so. Very much so. And I
and it's great. It's like it's almost like best way to describe it. There's a shared investment in the outcome for sure, but there's also, especially when you have people over who don't do a hell of a lot of cooking, but you get them interested in it. It's similar when I mentioned the collecting, and I said, let's for you example with me. You're really pushing hard for me to get into Rush, and I've been listening to it, and I'm sure if I have the moment where I click and said, this album is particularly fantastic, you will have a, forgive the pun, rush of satisfaction to no end. I know you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way with you do that with cooking. It's like, hey, I like, for example, when you're making polenta, right? It's just a cornmeal, kind of like almost like mashed potatoes, or farina, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But you mix it with like chicken stock and a lot of Parmesan cheese and butter. It's this fantastic thing to serve under a stew. And people would probably say, "Oh, I'm scared to fuck up the polenta." So, this, that, and the other. I said, all you do is like, here, I'm going to pour it in slightly. You whisk it up. and they get it and they see that it comes into the texture that they want. Like, holy shit, this looks good. They'll taste it. It's fantastic. You're like, oh yeah, it wasn't that hard, was it? Oh, and it's kind of interesting to do that, right? Oh, you want to do more, don't you? It's it's a validation, because we talked about, in a weird way, that personal nature of it, and the disassociation. You find yourself greater, in some moment greater than yourself, or you have this kind of moment of reverie when someone shares the hobby and says, yes, there's validation to this. There's something very big about that, even if it's so petty a hobby.
I agree. It feels as if you've been validated, and so to me, it's unsurprising that there are so many people who have these weird off the wall hobbies that they are, and the weirder, the more they try to find other people who share the hobby or the pastime or whatever. Because like for instance, model making. Yeah, there are conventions and stuff like that, but the really diehard conventions are for the weird hobbies, the ones that are kind of just fucking out there, right? Yes. It's because they're looking for more validation. Because kids doing models, that's from time immemorial, right? Well, no, I mean, they started making models, I don't know, in the 50s, I guess, or something like that. But, that notion, there is no convention for that. Or I don't know, there might be, for all I know. So don't give me shit in the comment section if there is. But the thing is, it's the weird hobbies that people start to look for other people. And that's the thing. For instance, we were talking about Rush, okay? I mean, you brought up Rush, and that I'm trying to convince you to listen to them and stuff like that. And that's the thing, now that I think back on it. They were such a weird band, and they were so shit on by the mainstream press, that the people who liked them were like, are we crazy or are they really good? Let's go and find out. Maybe we'll show it to somebody else, and maybe they can, validate us or tell us, no, you're really insane because this is really shitty music, right? And in my own experience, I remember so many of my classmates thought Rush was crap, right? But then there'd be like this one guy, and usually he was a smart guy. He was one of those really sharp customers who read a lot. And he'd be like, listen to them, wow, this is pretty fucking good. And then, 2 weeks later, he's like, I bought all the albums, Rush is the greatest band in the universe. And that kind of guy, right? And that happened all the time when I was in junior high, because, that's the time in your life when you're exposed to a whole bunch of boys, the same age, same, and you see what I'm saying. But the point I'm trying to make, you get more satisfaction from getting a convert if your hobby is weird or just not popular. And there is an element of insecurity, especially when you're young, when your hobby is not the cool hobby, not the thing, not the done thing, if you will. You know what I'm saying?
I remember, and it's funny you should mention this. I think we talked about it a little bit with our Star Wars discussion.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, so this was the 90s, Star Wars was not cool. You had to be a kind of dork to like it. And God forbid Star Trek. I'll bring up my love for Star Trek, and people run for the fucking hills. These days, it's like, every fucking dweeb around, because it's been marketed well, loves it. But it's funny. It's the hipster-ish notion, and you can shit on me if you want. You're probably accurate, but there is we've kind of dissected it right now, right? When it's so hard to get people to enjoy it, and you find someone who has it that kind of level that you have, and you just go in deep conversations. Like my close friend, we still have a lot of hobbies and shit in common. And even if, and the friendship's stronger than any one hobby, but I know that's a lot of, bits and bobs to it. And we go into so microscopic of detail and analysis and discussion about this that I cannot expect anyone in good conscience to care about it when we go into it, but we care about it, and that's all that really matters. And it's so satisfying to do it.
Yeah. My own thinking is that when you find somebody who likes the same hobby as you, especially if it's a hobby that dominates your attention at any given point in your life, it could have been in the past, right? You have a stronger affinity for that person, okay?
Right.
And you want to continue the conversation with that person, and you ultimately it's the first path in the road to friendship with that person.
Yes.
Okay. And I think it's something that If here's something that happens to me that I've noticed, I've talked to other people my age or older. As you get older, it's harder to make friends.
Yes.
Because there are a lot of other things on your time. Because friendships require a great deal of time, and if you don't have that time, then it's just not going to happen. You're just going to be acquaintances, and friendships as you get older, yeah. And also, what happens is that a lot of times, you have a family, you have the wife and the kids and what have you, and because of the wife and the kids, the possibility of having a friendship, well, do the wives get along? Do the kids get along? Are they roughly the same age? Because if they're not, then it's going to be harder to hang out together. If it's harder to hang out together, then less likely to be friends. And a lot of times you wind up being sort of like imperfectly friendly with, somebody who is married to your wife's friend, or is the father of your kids' friends. And it's like it's like a friend monk, but it's not a real friend because he's just attached to other people. You see what happens? And friendships become a lot harder as you age, and everybody feels lonelier as they age because of it, because you no longer have that camaraderie of friendship and that ability to view things from the same point of view. That ability to say, did you see that? And the other guy is like, yeah, totally. I totally buy it. And here's the key thing. Having a hobby in common is a big first step in having that similar point of view. Because like, for instance, you and I, Benway, when we disagree, I know where you're coming from. You know where I'm coming from. You and I have so many things in common so that when we disagree, it's mutually very interesting. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I get where Benway's coming from, and Benway's thinking, I get where Coach is coming from. How the hell is he thinking this shit about this? It's so obvious, right? Because we agree on so many other things. And that's what makes it interesting, and that's where you grow. It's in the differences that you grow, but you need the similarities, the shared interests.
In order to really tell the extent of the difference, you need to have so much aligned.
Yeah.
Right. So if you had two objects that it's oil and water completely, there's no point in talking about the differences because you just never intersect at any point.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
When you're aligned, you spot the differences very clearly. Right. And it's almost like, think about in all great stories, right? When you have the great hero and his antagonist, his nemesis, it's not just that they are the opposite. They have to have so much alignment first in order for the opposite to extenuate itself.
Yep.
For example, we talked about superheroes before. I don't want to belabor it, but the best example, Batman and Joker, right? Mm-hmm. They have a lot more in common in order to emphasize that difference.
Yep.
They're both fucked up. They're both operating outside of the law. What does that extenuate? Well, what is the main difference? One is order and security to a certain extent. The other is chaos, randomness, death, as it were. And you need that level of alignment in order to extenuate it, right? And I think that's also a big thing with friendships as well, is that you have, you to your point, you do learn a lot from those differences, but those differences are made clearer by so much you have in common. Mm-hmm. And then you get to a point where you relish the differences as well. I'm really interested to hear his take on it, because I know I can't just think of it and know that's exactly, my take will be his take, or vice versa. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because also what happens is that a lot of times when there's some new stimuli, the person that you're friends with, that you have all this common ground with, you're interested in their opinion because you want to see if they spot something that you missed.
Yes.
That often happens to me. Like when you and I are talking about whatever, often is not we start talking about it and we have this pretty much the same opinion, because you and I, just by virtue of doing the podcast so many hours, we really know each other really well in a lot of ways, and a lot of reactions. So most of the time, you and I have pretty much the same are on the same track and agree on the principal points. A lot of times, either you or I will have thought of an issue a bit more, and we'll have a few more insights or ideas about a given situation. Say something happens in politics, right? And either one of us will have spent more time. So we say this point, this extra bit of insight or information or what have you, and the other will be like, "Oh yeah, you're probably right," and that's it, because we just Totally agree. But when we hit on those pebbles on the road, because they really are pebbles, and we trip over them, we're like, what the fuck? And you're like, how the fuck can you say that? And I'm like, you're an idiot. And you're like, no, you're an idiot. Yeah. It's fun. It's really fun. Because there's nothing more boring than talking to somebody that you agree with 100% on fucking everything. I mean, that I think is unnatural. That is just... yes. There's something deeply wrong there. My thinking has always been, and I did a video about this. I called it, if you agree with somebody 100%, never trust anybody you agree with 100%. Because if the guy agrees with you 100%, he's probably trying to crook you somehow. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. Why would somebody agree with you? It's impossible. And it's that's the whole point of a friendship, of having those disagreements in that flood of agreement.
And that emphasizes the other important thing. It's funny how hobbies often kind of precipitate this.
Yeah.
What I've noticed is, like you said, it's harder and harder to make friends when you're older, but I don't think this contradicts that in any way. I notice that I don't have many friends the older I get, but I'm better for it because I feel like the friends I do have are stronger. There's a lot of acquaintances I can make, and there are a lot of acquaintances in my life. I'm going to one of their wedding this weekend even, and they're nice people and whatnot, but if they were to disappear from my life, so be it. There's like 4 or 5 close friends, maybe even less, but those are rocks of your humanity, your identity, and I'm much happier that there are fewer of them. Mm-hmm. Because I know that they're stronger. I can spend more time thinking about them. I can have those disagreements, and it's not a worry like, oh, did I damage something irrevocably? Is it going to harm my business career? Fuck that noise. Not important in those friendships, right?
Yeah, I agree. And so, with that, I think that we should call it a podcast, because I think that's that's a pretty good point. So yeah, I'm going to call it a podcast. And so, this has been the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill, and I'm signing off for Dr. Benway. Thank you so much for listening to us, and we will catch you next time.
Later.